541 AD. You are standing at the edge of a grain field in the Nile Delta, and the rats are dying. Not one or two, dozens of them, scattered across the dry earth between the irrigation channels, lying on their sides in the morning sun. Their bodies are swollen at the neck and groin. They have been dying for 3 days now, and the village elder has not been able to explain it. And the Byzantine tax collector arrives in 6 weeks expecting his full quota regardless of what the rats are doing. And something in your chest tells you, without being able to name it, that the world you have always known is approximately to stop. Today you are going to live the entire life of a man whose name was never written down, not in any Byzantine administrative record, not in any church register, not anywhere. He was an Egyptian grain farmer in the Nile Delta in the 6th century, a Coptic Christian who paid his taxes, buried his children, worked the same fields his grandfather worked, and died in the first great pandemic in recorded history. You have never heard of the plague of Justinian. Almost nobody has. It killed somewhere between 25 and 50 million people, and history moved on without much comment. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell me in the comments, would you have recognized the warning signs before it was too late? Let's go back to the beginning. You're born sometime around 510 AD in a village in the Nile Delta, a cluster of mud brick houses on raised ground above the floodplain, surrounded by irrigation channels and flat fields that stretched to the horizon in every direction. The Nile has been flooding and receding here for 5,000 years before your birth, and the entire structure of your world, the planting calendar, the tax year, the religious festivals, the smell of the air in different seasons, is organized entirely around that rhythm. Your mother labors in the family house, on a reed mat on the earthen floor. A neighboring woman assists. There is no physician within 20 kilometers, and the physicians who do exist in the nearby town practice a version of medicine inherited from Greek texts: 4 humors, blood and bile and phlegm, to be brought into balance through bloodletting and herbal compounds. For a difficult birth in a Delta village, none of this is available. What is available is the older woman's hands, some cloth, and whatever prayers the Coptic tradition provides for the occasion. Your mother tears. The bleeding takes time to stop. She survives this, which is not guaranteed. Roughly 1 child in 4 born in the Nile Delta in this period dies before the age of 5. Dysentery from contaminated water, respiratory infections during the cool season, malaria from the mosquitoes that breed in the irrigation channels, all of these move through village populations continuously, taking children in preference to adults because children have not yet built whatever partial resistance repeated exposure eventually provides. Your older sister died at 3 from a fever that lasted 4 days. Your younger brother will die at 18 months from something that causes his belly to swell hard as wood over the course of 2 weeks. Your mother buries both of them in the small plot behind the house, marked with simple wooden crosses in the Coptic manner. And she does not stop working during either period of grief because the fields do not recognize grief as a reason to pause. You are baptized within days of birth. The Coptic Church has been present in Egypt since the 1st century. Tradition holds that the Apostle Mark brought it here personally, and in your village it is the central organizing institution of daily life. The priest is a lean, tired man who performs the liturgy in a mixture of Coptic and Greek, and whose primary role beyond spiritual care is reading and writing on behalf of a community that is almost entirely illiterate. He reads the tax documents when the Byzantine administrators send them. He writes letters to distant relatives on behalf of families who need to communicate across the Delta. He records births and deaths in a manuscript that will not survive the century. He baptizes you with cold water from the Nile, says the required words, and moves on to the next family. Your father is a grain farmer. This is not a choice. It is simply what the men in your family are, in the same way that the Nile floods in summer and the fields dry in winter. He works a plot of land that technically belongs to a large landowner in Alexandria, a Byzantine Greek with whom your father will never exchange a single word. The arrangement is a form of tenant farming. Your family works the land, keeps enough grain to survive the year, and hands over a fixed percentage of the harvest to the landowner's representative, who appears at harvest time with a scale and a written record and the authority of the Byzantine state behind him. The percentage is not negotiable. The tax burden in 6th century Byzantine Egypt is layered. There is the landowner's share. There is the imperial grain tax, which goes directly to Constantinople to feed the capital and the army. There are additional levies for road maintenance, for the upkeep of irrigation infrastructure, for various administrative costs that your father cannot read about and therefore cannot dispute. In a good year, when the Nile floods to the correct height, not too high and not too low, and the harvest is full, your family retains enough to eat adequately from one harvest to the next. In a bad year, the calculations become dangerous. You learn this arithmetic before you learn anything else. You learn it by watching your father's face when the tax collector leaves. The particular stillness that settles over him when the numbers have worked out. The different and harder stillness when they have not. You learn it by understanding, without being told directly, that the grain stored in the back room is not food. It is survival margin, and survival margin is not the same thing as food, until the new harvest is confirmed, and the tax collector has come and gone, and whatever remains in the back room can finally be eaten without accounting. You are 7 years old. You already know how to flood and drain a small irrigation channel by redirecting water with a wooden board and packed mud. You know which fields flood fastest and which hold water longest after the Nile recedes. You know the color of soil that has been properly saturated versus soil that will crack before the grain roots reach water. Your father taught you none of this explicitly. You learned it by following him into the fields every morning since you could walk, watching his hands, watching the ground, watching the sky. Outside your village, the world is large and largely irrelevant. Constantinople is the capital of the empire. You know this the way you know the emperor's name, as a fact with no personal weight. The emperor is Justinian. He is building a cathedral called Hagia Sophia, and is fighting wars in Africa and Italy to restore the old Roman territories. These events cost money. The money comes from taxes. The taxes come from places like your field. You do not know any of this yet. You are 7 years old, and you are standing in the mud beside your father watching the water level in the channel, learning to read the earth before the earth decides to read you. By the time you are 15, your back already carries the particular curve that comes from years of bending over irrigation channels and pulling weeds from wet soil in a half-crouch. It is not a dramatic deformity. You would not notice it yourself if you could see it, but the older men in your village all carry the same shape, and you are acquiring it on schedule. The body adapts to what it is asked to do repeatedly, and what it is asked to do is bend and lift and pull and carry from the moment the sun clears the horizon until the light fails completely. 6 days a week, every week, for the rest of your life. The farming calendar in the Nile Delta runs on 3 seasons that the old Egyptian language, still spoken in the village alongside Greek, names precisely: the flood, the emergence, and the harvest. From June through September, the Nile rises, covering the low fields with brown water that deposits a thin layer of silt, the most fertile soil on earth, renewed annually without any effort from you. From October through February, the water recedes, the fields emerge dark and damp, and you plant emmer wheat, barley, lentils, flax. From March through May, you harvest what survived the insects, the birds, the occasional late flood, and the dry wind that comes off the desert in spring and can strip moisture from a grain head in a single afternoon. Your primary tool is a wooden hoe with an iron blade. Iron, not bronze, which makes it heavier and more durable, and which your family has used carefully for 2 generations. You also use a wooden plow, pulled by a pair of oxen that your family shares with 2 neighboring families on a rotating schedule. The oxen are more valuable than any person in the arrangement. When one of them develops a leg infection in your 18th year, your father loses sleep over it in a way he did not lose sleep over your brother's death. This is not callousness. It is the mathematics of survival. A dead ox means no plowing, which means no planting, which means no harvest, which means no tax payment, which means a debt to the landowner's representative that compounds faster than any field can recover from. The ox survives. Your father sleeps again. You marry at 21. The arrangement is made between your father and a farmer from a village 2 kilometers east whose daughter is 17 and healthy and comes with a small additional plot of land as part of the agreement. You have spoken to her perhaps 4 times before the wedding. She is quiet and competent and can read a soil condition as accurately as you can, which matters more in practical terms than anything else about her. The Coptic priest performs the ceremony. Your village contributes what food it can spare for the wedding meal: flatbread, lentil stew, dried fish from the delta channels, a small quantity of date wine that someone has been saving. You eat well for one evening. The next morning you both go back to the fields. Your house is mud brick, walls roughly half a meter thick, which keeps the interior cool in summer and holds warmth in the mild delta winters. The floor is packed earth, covered with reed matting. There are 2 rooms, one where the family sleeps and eats, one where grain and tools are stored. There is no furniture in the Roman sense, no chairs, no table with legs. You sit and eat on the floor on mats, as your parents did, as their parents did. A small clay lamp burning linseed oil provides light after dark. It produces a low, unsteady flame and a thin thread of black smoke that over years coats the upper portions of the walls and ceiling with soot. You do not notice the soot. It has always been there. The water you drink comes from the irrigation channel nearest the house, drawn each morning in clay jars. The channel connects to the Nile system and carries whatever the Nile carries: silt, agricultural runoff, the waste of upstream villages, the bodies of animals that die near the water. You drink this water, boiled when there is fuel to boil it, and unboiled when there is not. The distinction matters enormously in ways that will not be scientifically understood for another 1,300 years. What you understand is that summer water makes people sick more often than winter water, and that children are more vulnerable than adults, and that some years are worse than others for reasons nobody can explain. Your first child is born when you are 23, a boy, baptized within 2 days, named after your father. He is healthy and loud, and reaches his 2nd birthday without serious illness, which feels like a gift significant enough to warrant a small offering at the church. Your wife becomes pregnant again the following year. The 2nd child, a girl, survives. The 3rd does not. A boy, born too early, too small, who lives for 3 days and is buried in the plot behind the house beside your brother and sister from childhood. You make a wooden cross and press it into the soil and say the words you know and go back to the field because the irrigation channel needs clearing before the planting window closes. This is not hardness. This is the management of grief in a life that cannot stop moving. The field does not wait for morning. The tax collector does not wait for morning. The Nile does not wait for morning. You learn to carry the dead alongside the living and keep your hands moving. Your body at 30 is functional but visibly used. The calluses on your palms are thick enough to grip a rough rope without pain. Your feet are permanently cracked at the heels from years of walking in wet mud and dry dust ultimately, and the cracks occasionally open and bleed, which you treat by wrapping them in linen strips cut from old cloth. Your lower back tightens into a hard, flat ache by midday during heavy planting work, and you manage this by pausing briefly at noon to straighten fully and press your fists into the muscles on either side of your spine. The pain is not interesting to you. It is simply part of the afternoon, the same way the heat is part of the afternoon. You eat twice a day. Morning: flatbread and lentils, occasionally an egg when the family's small flock of chickens is producing reliably. Evening: lentil stew with whatever vegetables the kitchen garden behind the house is offering, and more flatbread. Meat appears perhaps once every 2 weeks, salt fish from the Delta, or occasionally a chicken that has stopped laying and therefore stopped justifying its existence. Fresh fruit when the season provides it, figs, dates, pomegranates from a tree near the house that your grandfather planted. You do not go hungry in good years. In bad years, you reduce the evening meal and increase the proportion of lentils, which are cheaper and filling, and which your children will eat without complaint because they have never known anything different. 35 years old, 2 living children, 1 dead. A field that produces reliably when the Nile behaves, a wife who manages the household with the same quiet competence she brought to the marriage. A back that hurts every afternoon. A small Coptic cross on the wall above the sleeping area, worn smooth from being touched in passing over 20 years. A life that is hard and narrow and entirely without drama, which in the 6th century A.D. is the best possible outcome available to a man of your position. In 541, the rats begin to die in the fields. You do not know what it means yet. You will know soon. The rats have been dying for a week before anyone in your village connects them to anything larger. Dead rats are not unusual. Cats kill them, traps catch them. Poison grain laid near the storage rooms takes them in small numbers throughout the year. But this is different, in volume and in appearance. These rats are not killed. They are collapsed. Found in open ground, away from walls and burrows, lying on their sides with their necks and groins visibly enlarged, as though something inside them has pushed outward against the skin. By the 4th day, the smell of their decay is present across the entire village. By the 7th day, you stop counting them. The village elder consults the Coptic priest. The priest consults the scripture he knows and finds nothing directly applicable. He suggests increased prayer and a fast. The elder agrees. The village prays and fasts, and the rats continue dying. And then, in the 2nd week of the rats dying, the first person gets sick. He is a man from the northern edge of the village, a farmer like you, slightly older, who spent several days clearing dead rats from his grain storage room. He develops a fever on a Tuesday. You know it is Tuesday because it is 2 days before the weekly liturgy. By Thursday, he cannot attend the liturgy because he cannot stand without assistance. By the following Monday, he is dead. The swelling in his groin, which his wife describes to the other women in the village in a voice that is very carefully controlled, was the size of a large egg by the time it killed him. It was black at the center. It was hot to the touch. It smelled, even before he died, of something that had no name in any language available to your village. This is bubonic plague, Yersinia pestis, carried by fleas living on the black rats that have been flooding into the delta from somewhere further east following the grain trade routes. The bacterium moves from rat to flea to human through a single bite, and the human body's response is the formation of buboes, swollen, infected lymph nodes in the groin, the armpit, or the neck, depending on where the flea bit. The fever that follows can reach 40 degrees. The internal hemorrhaging that follows that turns the skin dark in patches. Death follows in 2 to 6 days for roughly half of those infected, and for the other half the recovery is slow, painful, and incomplete. You know none of this. What you know is that your neighbor is dead, and that the swelling he had before dying looked exactly like the swellings on the dead rats in your field. You make the connection. You say it out loud to your wife one evening after the children are asleep. She looks at you for a long moment and then looks at the grain storage room, where rats have been a constant presence for years. And then she looks back at you. Neither of you says anything else. There is nothing to do with the information. You cannot leave the field. You cannot stop the rats. You cannot explain germ theory to the fleas. The second person to die in your village is a child. 7 years old, a girl from the family 2 houses east of yours. She develops the fever on a Wednesday and is dead by the weekend. The bubo in her neck is visible from across the room by the second day. Her parents sit outside their house on Saturday morning with a particular kind of stillness that you recognize. You have worn it yourself, sitting outside the house after your third child did not survive. It is the stillness of people who have passed through the worst moment and not yet reached the other side of it, where ordinary time resumes. The priest performs both funerals within the same week. He is beginning to look frightened, which is more alarming than the deaths themselves, because the priest has seen a great deal of death and is not easily alarmed. He writes a letter to the bishop in the nearby town describing what is happening. The bishop's response arrives 2 weeks later and recommends prayer, fasting, and the administration of last rites promptly to the dying, because the number of dying is increasing too rapidly to allow delays. In Constantinople, the imperial physicians are attempting to understand what is happening. The plague arrived there by ship from Egypt in 541, carried in the grain that your fields produced. The grain in the hold of a ship also carried the rats, and the rats carried the fleas, and the fleas carried Yersinia pestis from the delta to the capital of the Byzantine Empire in approximately 3 weeks of sailing time. The imperial physician Procopius, who will later write an account of the plague, describes the buboes, the fever, the delirium that causes some victims to imagine they see dark figures standing at the foot of their beds before they lose consciousness. He also describes the physician's response: bloodletting to rebalance the humors, herbal compounds, prayer. None of it affects the bacteria in the slightest. In your village, the response is simpler. You move your family's sleeping mats away from the walls where rats travel. You block the gaps in the storage room with packed mud and stones. You kill every rat you can find with a wooden club, not knowing that the fleas leave the cooling body of a dead rat within minutes and begin searching for a new, warm host, which may be you. You wash your hands in the irrigation channel water, not knowing this does nothing relevant. You pray every evening with your wife and children, hands joined, the Coptic words moving through the dark room in low voices. This also does nothing relevant, but it costs nothing, and it keeps the family close together in the evenings, which has its own value, separate from outcome. You find the bubo on a Thursday morning, getting dressed in the gray light before dawn. It is in your left groin, a swelling roughly the size of a walnut, firm, warm through the skin, tender enough that when your fingers close around it you pull your hand back sharply. You stand completely still for several seconds. You think about the man from the northern edge of the village. You think about the girl with the swelling in her neck. You think about the rats in the field 3 weeks ago, lying on their sides in the morning sun with their bodies swollen exactly like this. Your wife is still asleep. Your children are still asleep. The dawn light is just beginning to come through the gap in the window shutter, laying a pale line across the reed matting on the floor. Outside, the irrigation channel is running. You can hear it, the low, constant sound of moving water that has been the background of your entire life. The Nile is in its flood stage, doing what it has always done, indifferent to what is happening to the people who depend on it. You get dressed. You go outside. You stand at the edge of the field for a long moment, looking at the flat, dark earth, and the sky beginning to lighten in the east. Then you go back inside, wake your wife with a hand on her shoulder, and show her what you found. She presses her fingers against it carefully. She does not speak immediately. When she does speak, her voice is the same voice she used when the third child was dying, steady, quiet, organized around the management of something that cannot be managed. She tells you to lie down. You tell her the irrigation channel needs clearing before midday. She tells you again to lie down. You lie down. The fever begins by noon. The fever moves through you in stages, and each stage is worse than the one before it. By midday on the first day, it is simply heat. Your skin radiating warmth that your wife can feel without touching you. Your mouth dry no matter how much water she brings in the clay jar. Your eyes sensitive to the light coming through the window shutter in a way that makes you turn your face toward the wall. By evening, the heat has become something structural, as though the fever is not happening on the surface of your body but inside the bones themselves, radiating outward. You cannot find a comfortable position on the mat. Every surface feels wrong. Your wife keeps the children in the second room. She has understood, without anyone explaining the mechanism, that proximity to you is dangerous. She brings water. She brings a small piece of flatbread that you cannot eat. She wets a strip of linen in the water jar and presses it to your forehead. And the momentary coolness is the most relief the next 4 days will offer you. On the second day, the bubo in your groin has grown. It is now the size of a large fig, visible through the cloth of your clothing as a distinct swelling, hot enough to feel through the linen without pressing directly on it. The pain radiates down your left leg and up into your lower abdomen in pulses that arrive every few minutes with enough force to make you curl inward. Your wife examines it in the morning light, and her face tells you what she is not saying. She sends your son, he is 12 years old, to bring the priest. The priest arrives by mid-morning. He is visibly exhausted. He has performed 7 funerals in the past 2 weeks and has been called to the bedsides of the dying so frequently that he has developed the particular efficiency of a man who has stopped having enough time to grieve between visits. He administers the last rites fully and carefully, kneeling beside your mat, his voice moving through the Coptic liturgy in a rhythm so practiced it has become almost physical. A sound he produces the way your hands produce a specific knot, from the body rather than the mind. He touches your forehead with oil. He says the words for the dying. He looks at the bubo once, briefly, and does not look at it again. Before he leaves, he tells your wife to keep the children away from you and to pray without ceasing. He tells her that God is taking many people this season, and that the taking is not a punishment, but a mystery. She thanks him. He goes to the next house, where someone else is dying. On the third day, you begin to lose the distinction between sleeping and waking. The fever reaches its peak. Your body temperature is high enough to cause confusion, to bend the boundary between what is present and what the feverish mind generates from its own stored material. You see your father standing in the corner of the room, which is not possible because your father died 6 years ago. You see the irrigation channel running through the room, which is not possible either. But you can hear the water clearly, and it is the most comforting sound available, so you do not resist it. You hear your children's voices from the second room, and they sound very far away. Your wife sits beside you through the night. She is not sleeping. She is watching your breathing, which has become audible. A slow, effortful sound that was not there 2 days ago. She has seen this progression twice before, once in the man from the northern edge of the village, once in the child with the swelling in her neck. She knows the progression's endpoint. She sits with her hands in her lap and the small clay lamp burning beside her, and she watches you breathe, counting the breaths without meaning to. The hemorrhaging begins on the 4th day. This is septicemic involvement. The bacteria have entered the bloodstream and are triggering a systemic inflammatory response that causes bleeding beneath the skin. Dark patches appear on your arms and across your chest. Not bruises from impact, but blood pooling under the skin from vessels that are failing invisibly. Procopius, writing about this in Constantinople, will call it the Black Death of the skin. In your village, there is no name for it yet. Only the recognition in your wife's face when she pulls back the linen sheet in the morning and sees what has happened overnight. You are not fully conscious by this point, which is the one mercy the disease extends. The delirium that the fever produces is a partial barrier against the full experience of what the body is undergoing. You are present intermittently. You recognize your wife's voice when she speaks close to your ear. You feel her hand on yours. You hear the children at one point during the day, your son asking something in a low voice and your wife answering in a lower one. You try to respond and cannot organize the words into sequence. The words exist, but the sequence does not. Outside your house, your village is coming apart. 12 people have died in 3 weeks. Several families from the outer edges of the village have attempted to leave, packing what they can carry and walking toward the town, as though distance from the dying will provide protection from the thing killing them. The town itself is worse. The plague arrived there before it arrived in your village, carried faster by the higher density of people and rats in the market district. And the death rate in the town is now high enough that the burial process has broken down. The Coptic priest there is writing letters to the bishop, describing bodies left in houses because the families lack the strength to carry them. The bishop is writing letters to Constantinople, describing the same thing at larger scale. Constantinople is burying its dead in mass pits outside the city walls because the cemeteries have filled, and the grave diggers are themselves dying faster than they can be replaced. Emperor Justinian has ordered the imperial treasury to fund emergency burials. He has also contracted the plague himself in Constantinople and survived it, a fact that will be recorded in detail by his court historians, while the names of the hundreds of thousands who did not survive go unrecorded entirely, which is the consistent mathematics of power across all of human history. Your field is unplanted. The planting window is closing. The irrigation channel you did not clear before the fever took you has silted partially at the eastern end, slowing the water flow to the lower section of the plot. Your 12-year-old son has been attempting to maintain the channel alone, working in the early mornings before the heat builds, using the same wooden hoe your father taught you with. He is not yet strong enough to do it properly. He is doing it anyway. You die on the 5th day, before dawn, while your wife is sitting beside you, and the lamp has burned low, and the village outside is completely silent. Your breathing changes in the hour before, slowing, lengthening the pauses between breaths until the pause simply does not end. Your wife sits with you for a time after. Then she wakes your son. You were buried the same day in the plot behind the house, beside your 3 children who did not survive childhood. The priest comes and says the words. Your wife and son and daughter stand in the morning heat and listen. The Nile is in its flood stage. The irrigation channel runs past the edge of your property with its low, continuous sound. The field is dark and wet and empty, and it will need to be planted within the week or the season is lost. Your son plants it. He is 12 years old, and his back already carries a slight forward curve from the weeks of work since you fell ill. He uses your hoe. He floods and drains the channels the way he watched you do it from the time he could walk. He does not do it perfectly. He does it well enough. You just lived through a pandemic that killed roughly half the known world and left almost no individual record of the people it consumed. No diary, no letters, no portrait, only a curve in the soil where a body was laid, and a field that someone kept planting afterward because stopping was not an option. What I want to know from you is this. At what point in this story did you feel the system had completely failed the people living inside it? The taxes that continued through the plague, the medicine that did nothing, or the burial records that never wrote your name down? Tell me in the comments. And if this kind of history matters to you, subscribe, because there are 100 more lives like this one, and every one of them deserves to be remembered.